Welcome to the second in our series Fireside Chats entitled Leadership Lessons in Troubled Times. This free online series is brought to you by the Schulich Executive Education Center, or SEEC. My name is Robert Lin, and I am Associate Director at SEEC and will be moderator for today's session. Today's topic is Leadership Lessons, A View from the Top. Joining me for this morning's 30-minute session are Alan Middleton and Ronnie Miller. Ronnie is President and CEO of Roche Canada. He will be interviewed by Alan Middleton, SEEC's Executive Director. There will be a 15-minute Q&A session at the end of the fireside chat. Attendees can submit their questions using the chat function on your computer, and we will ask as many questions as we can as time permits. We are also recording this session so that we can share it with those who are unable to attend the live session this morning. Now, let's get started. I would like to hand over to Alan Middleton, SEEC's Executive Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I hope everybody out there is doing all the right things as we pass into our future. And welcome aboard, Ronnie.
Good morning, Alan. Happy to be here.
Nice. You're looking fit and healthy and ready and getting there ready for the day as usual. Really three things I want to talk about today, but as head of one of the top pharmaceutical companies in the world and their Canadian operation, I have to ask you how you're seeing the evolution in Canada of handling the virus and the cooperation that you're seeing across different levels of government and industry.
Yeah, I think that's a terrific question right now. We're often a much unheralded industry, but at times like this, I think the general population starts to appreciate the science and the research. Also, as a company, Roche are a big diagnostic company, and I'm sure everyone that's in the media understands that testing in this COVID-19 crisis that we're living through is incredibly important, not only to understand the disease, but to try and get the economy built back up and get people back to work. Indeed, also quite a few of our drugs at Roche and other companies are being used in late-stage patients, and there's a global study running at the moment for people that are on ventilators at the very late stage of the disease that we see some very promising results in. So science overrides everything at times like this.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Main focus of our conversation is going to be the leadership lessons coming out of it and how we've been doing. One of the things we talked about in you and I chatting earlier is the importance of cooperation, and both cooperation across silos within an organization, but indeed outside the organization, government, with patients, with hospitals, etc. Could you talk a little more about your philosophy on that? Because you've had a tremendous career. You've been running Roche Canada for some 20 odd years. And by the way, I hope you're staying. We want to keep you. Talk about that element, cooperation element.
Yeah, that's a really important issue. I think the best way to begin is, and something I'm sure you're teaching at the school, is the VUCA world that we live in, the volatility, uncertainty, the complexity and the ambiguity. And as a company, we actually started to prepare for this a few years ago and started to go through an agile transformation. And it's serendipitous. The ideal for doing that was we expected a lot of biosimilars to come into our world and treat Hamlet, sorry, this is my assistant trying to get the hold of me again. Try to get at our market share, and this is what we're preparing for. And now, of course, we're dealing with a COVID world. So ultimately, we were prepared basically to move into this agile environment, to have teams that are self-managed, to take away hierarchy that would have slowed things down. And this has been put to the test. So this has also been backed up by the virtual world that we're living in, lots of contact with staff, and also for staff to contact patients and customers. And we actually started reaching out when COVID was first coming to Canada and asked our customers what we could do to help. And I think they truly appreciated that. Whereas previously we would have probably prepared to react rather than be proactive. And we set up squads, we do sprints. People are accustomed to working this very quick turnover mode. And we were prepared for it. So I think it's helped enormously, and it's accelerated our transformation enormously too.
Yeah. Is it still evolving? You see this continuing?
Yes, I do. I think that it's been a world that's been turned upside down. We're aiming to be a teal organization. I don't know if that is part of the learnings. was born out of a book called Reinventing Organizations, written by a consultant from McKinsey. I think what really has impressed me is that the X and Y generation have really embraced this. And it's been tougher, I think, on people in mid-career who've worked their way up through the hierarchy, and to see that hierarchy be dissolved. But it brings new ideas and certainly accelerates things that digitalization, you know, from an environment, a group of people that know much more about this than us baby boomers, Alan. So it's been very helpful and a good learning for senior leaders as well. And Roche Canada, we've certainly exemplified how to do this in the rest of the Roche world. I'm very pleased. And that also encompasses dealing with government, dealing with other parts of society that we interact with. A good example, we went to Health Canada and had a sprint with them, not something that we would do traditionally. And the customers actually enjoy it. They enjoy the involvement, rolling the sleeves up and living in the real world. So it's helped our relationships become more firm.
Yeah. That area of conversation we had before with Michael Garden from Humber River,
yes,
he was pointing out how important in all this the emotional connection is. It's not just the formal organization, but having people emotionally sharing and committed. Can you talk about, because you, as you said, you started earlier with Agile. How does that work in the organization?
Well, you know, often we focus on things that what you inspect gets respected. And I think sometimes we forget about the patient. And I think what we've done is bring the patient to the center of everything we do. We call it the North Star. Yeah. And basically it's getting more patients on drug faster, regardless of how we do that. And you know, I think that is giving something back to society in a way that maybe we as an industry are not perceived to do. We're seen as profiteering and gouging, but you know, we do a lot of really good things that we don't make enough of publicly. So for example, right now in the COVID world, people are losing their jobs, they're not insured, and we're trying to bridge the treatment on areas like cancer, which of course is life-threatening, multiple sclerosis, which can be a very debilitating disease, hemophilia, lots of different therapeutic areas where we're truly trying to help, and we're taking on the cost of that during this crisis.
How have you found working with your senior management team going through this? Because you and I are online, and it's not quite the same as, you know, putting around somebody, or, you know, sort of going for a coffee or a drink with them. And how have you managed that to help them move down that path?
We've worked a lot on our socialization and intimacy in the previous 2 or 3 years, and what we do now is a fairly regular virtual meeting, including the occasional quarantini on a Friday. But we have lunches together, so we'll eat lunch virtually and interact with each other. And then added to that, there are 2 formal meetings where we review what's happening within the Roche world twice a week. I think it's really important to consider not only the physical health of your colleagues, but the mental health. And we've had some good laughs. We often wear different T-shirts and give the background of the T-shirt just to keep the level of interest up. Or
I noticed you dressed up for us today, Ronnie.
Yes, exactly. We're white shirt. We look like baby boomers, Alan.
Thinking about that area of cooperation, you and I are chatting before about, I'll use the word impressed. You've been with how Ontario's going about handling this, because of some connections that are being made between the healthcare institutions, the government, and the pharma companies. And that's really good news to hear.
Yeah, I think you know, I'm not making a political statement, but I think the present Premier is really pretty hands-on. And I was giving you an example where he called me. I mean, this is again reflecting on my 20-year tenure. He does know me. He put me in contact immediately with the CEO of UHN, the University Health Network, linked in with my colleague who runs diagnostic, and we had a 4-way conversation on the telephone. And I think that's a very good example of hands-on leadership by the Premier at this stage. Yeah. Maybe not always the best example in the US at this present time by some of the advice coming out of Washington, but you know, I think as a country we've handled this quite well, both federally and provincially. Yeah.
So are you on the optimistic side for us at the moment?
I am on the optimistic side. I think we've managed to flatten the curve. I believe that a vaccine will be produced, but it will take a year to 18 months. I think testing from a provision of understanding disease is going to be incredibly important. But I think society will change. I think we'll have to maintain social gap over a period of time, and we'll probably likely have to wear masks for the time being. Who would ever have dreamed we would walk into a bank wearing a mask?
Yeah, exactly.
Walking out with some money that wasn't done illegally, for example.
I have an early question actually from Vilma Dean.
Oh, yes.
And she says, how do you instill and maintain focus and commitment to the organization's vision and strategy with your team in this disruptive VUCA environment? So you talked about how you rehearsed and practiced getting into this, but you're still a business and you still have to move forward. So yeah, I think that's at the heart of her question.
I think firstly, we were set up from a IT perspective very well globally. And there are some examples of companies through the world that are not so well set up and have to allocate time when they can use Zoom or use the equipment. I think it's actually accelerated the interaction, funnily enough, more, because you get everyone on screen that you need to make a decision. Zoom has been a great facility to do that. And that's without any context of the security aspect, but I think as a tool to use to interact with a group of people, it works tremendously well. And we've actually stepped that up. So in many ways, there's actually more contact on a two-dimensional virtual way than there would be sometimes physically. And that includes also working with our field staff who are the most remotely based in the country. So I think that part's important, and maintaining a focus on the business, keep asking the same questions. And you can have a virtual sprint as much as you can as a physical one. So quite easy to do. You just got to watch time, and you don't try and take up too much time on the screen. It's not healthy for anyone.
Absolutely. Personal question. How have you personally managed in all this? Because, one of the comments about CEOs is who do they go to talk to? So, it's a lot of pressure on the people at the top, managing both the short term and the medium term.
Actually, I've bonded with my dog in a way that I've never been able to do. He's actually nudging me in the morning to go for the early morning walks. And if I have an early morning video, he gets quite miffed. He gets upset. Equally with my hierarchy in Canada, there's a global hierarchy, and we've maintained similar contact. In fact, the VC I was on before this one, I was with my global colleagues. So the same thing applies throughout the rest of the Roche world for sure, and most other companies, I believe.
Yeah. As you think about a recovery and moving ahead, what do you want to keep and what don't you want to keep from this experience?
What I don't want to keep is the amount of flying I do. I'm in a VIP with Air Canada. I think that's gone. I think that jumping on an aeroplane and flying across the Atlantic will be good. And that's a good thing for the environment. I think we've all seen that. I think the fact that we're using this virtual world in a way that has been accelerated, I think that will continue to be done. I think there'll be more working from home. And I think if that impacts into the medical environment, I think you'll see more consultation from physicians now at telemedicine. Doctors would never have picked up a phone 20 years ago. We've almost jumped over that telephone. Now we're at the computer. And my own GP, he said he loves working from home. He doesn't have to drive to the clinic. He feels safer. And he actually focuses sometimes more on the patient because there's less interruption. I also, as I said to you, I think when we spoke earlier, the safest place to be treated is at home these days, not in an institution like a hospital. And that may accelerate treatments that actually are able to be applied at home, even including IV medicine and different ways. I think the industry will step up and produce medicines that will allow that mobility to happen.
Are there things that, you still think better as some of the older, I won't call them older systems, but the way we traditionally worked?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned earlier, Alan, you can only put a metaphorical hand round a shoulder or give a metaphorical hug. And, we're human beings. We react to interaction with others. And I worry about the physicality, the distance that we're going to maintain, that we'll lose that. And I think that's an important thing. How's it going to be done safely in the future is a good question, but at some stage that has to come back. Otherwise it'll not be healthy for the human race.
Absolutely. But don't go too far back, otherwise your dog won't get enough exercise.
That's exactly right.
Okay, I'm getting some questions. That's why I'm leaning in, because I've got lousy eyesight, so I'm reading the questions as they come in. This one's from Pauline. Have you had to adapt your management style during this crisis? If so, can you give some tips?
Actually, well, not for me, not. I would say one that the agility model suits my management style. It's taken 32 years to catch up with how I've always operated. So,
we're a Glaswegian. You're always ahead.
Yeah, well, we try to be, occasionally try to be. So, and also I think tenure, because I know my staff very well, the relationship's already been built. So that's an easier gap to fill than someone that's brand new into the job, where the staff doesn't know the GM or the CEO, and there's a lot of guesswork going on. I think people know me well, what they see is what they get, and that's pretty well established. More difficult for a new person coming in, trying to establish.
To put you on the spot, how would you advise somebody moving into the job for the first thing? What should they be doing in this environment?
Listening. Exposure to as many people as possible at different levels in the organization, and listening. Don't try to impose, don't try to tell, try to understand where the mindset is, understand the culture of the company before you start imposing your plans and ideas.
As you move into planning phases, we're doing that again right now, we're doing our plan. How do you manage between, you know, what looks like realistic direction versus how do you handle the fact that, you know, there may be another version of this, or it may be slower coming back? Because, you know, we're all start to be judged on our objectives and our accomplishments. You know, how do you do that with so much uncertainty?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult to plan for uncertainty or ambiguity, but I think you have to try and encompass all different aspects that could happen to your business. As it is, as is usually the case in a pandemic or epidemic, our industry does quite well because there's a higher demand placed on the science and placed on the products. We have a challenge at the moment is to make enough of one particular drug that may well be proven to be useful in late stage patients. It was already approved for rheumatoid arthritis, but it seems to now have a place in the COVID world. So we're trying to step up production to meet the demand without actually knowing if the drug will be effective or not. So these are the risks that you have to manage and mitigate over time and plan for. And the same, the new world that we go back to as an industry, it's traditionally based on representatives and staff meeting customers. I think that will be ratcheted back. People may not want to meet physically and may want to meet more virtually. So we may have to have a model that means less contact on a frequent basis with customers than we've traditionally had in the past.
Going back to some more questions from Mark Lavonin. Good to see you both. Yeah, Sue, you know, good to see you both. Have you and Roche, this is from Kapreet Singh, trying to hold his, have you and Roche been handling the field staff who have to work in the warehouses and other areas on a day-to-day basis? How have you been managing that?
Yeah, I think there's a select group of workers that physically have to put themselves in a little more danger than the rest. Fortunately, Roche have a system of 3PL, or distribution is done by other parties for us. So it's very much a skeleton staff that actually go to the office. We closed our office on the 13th of March and we still haven't reopened. So to date, and touch wood, not one member of our company has actually been diagnosed with COVID in Canada. So that is good news. And we try to make sure that the health, both physically and mentally, of our staff is maintained at all times. We have a leadership team that are managing day to day. They send out regular bulletins. So we get people up to date as much as possible. And there's lots of this virtual contact, even with field staff on an ongoing basis, including a town hall. We do town halls regularly, and I send out videos, albeit from Florida, where I am at the moment, but just to remind people that to look after themselves and their families. I think the biggest challenge right now is anyone with young children, where they're trying to balance the job and also educate the child because the schools are closed. That is a major undertaking. Fortunately, my kids are all up and out, so I don't have that problem.
Another question from Andrea makes a distinction between, and it's somewhat what you said about people who've been around a while, so you've got to know each other a little bit, so you've got some working capability, but new people coming in or making transfer decisions in this environment. What extra attention should we be paying there? Yeah,
that's something the company's been focused on. It's slowed down enormously. So people that are going to come into Canada, that they've been delayed, they may still be based in Switzerland. So they're basically treading water. And advice is they have to tread water until we're ready to make the move. That is throughout the rest of the world at the moment. We have simplified the procedure, and they've just published a new transfer document last week, and we're trying to make it easier for everyone. But at the moment, it's in stasis. because you can't even get on an aeroplane in some places.
Absolutely.
You know, I think we'll see a flurry of activity once this safety level goes back up, and people will be moved and accommodated in roles. Look, in these times of difficulty, I always see it as an opportunity. People with mindset, most adaptable, will do well.
Well, I think there's another characteristic, Ronnie, that you've always had, which is you're an optimist.
Yes.
You believe in finding the way. Question from Brian Weber. Can you talk, whoops, it's just moved on me. Will Canada be able to maintain its public health safety as America's greatest, our trading partner, points out the real difference in the public healthcare systems?
I think if you look at the data, actually, one of the worst affected countries is the US, because there is a have and have not philosophy. I mean, in a country like Canada, like the UK, with a publicly provided healthcare system, it's the same for everyone. So people that can afford the treatment in America privately do well. Those in the inner city areas that are struggling, less so. So I think there is a bigger gap in the US than people would imagine. And actually, I think Canada's responded very well. The availability of beds, treatment. Actually, a friend of mine was diagnosed with COVID and went through the IC unit, came out the other side very positively, and was well looked after in Toronto. And I think times like this, you appreciate what you have. I think the UK, also the NHS has stepped up. It gets a lot of criticism, but anyone can walk in off the street and be treated, and it's not a question of how much money you have in your pocket. We should,
they were a little late coming in to addressing it. I'm looking at Shelley's question to so as an expert. We are private clinic sites conducting trials for many pharmaceutical companies, including Roche.
Yes.
Not all the studies are on hold. Now all studies are on hold, no revenue coming in. Her team is panicked.
Yes. Well, this is the backlash sometimes of the economy getting hit. I think one of the biggest concerns, and I'm glad the question came up, is that in Canada we have a range of ethics boards, and they've done at provincial and often hospital level, and that is slowing us up in getting patients recruited into studies in comparison to other jurisdictions in the world. And we're actually in negotiations with Health Canada at the moment to have a national ethics board that will make a decision on a study to move things forward. So for the drug I was mentioning earlier that's been used in COVID, we only have 4 patients recruited in Canada versus 160 elsewhere in the world. We have to change this model, and hopefully that will reflect back on Shelley and make that a more positive environment in the future. Stick in it. It will come eventually.
Can I broaden that question, because it's something all the sectors face, which is priority looking after their own employees, looking after their customers, but then a bunch of suppliers who we're all so dependent on, and with some of the smaller suppliers, how do we work as organizations to, do we just cut them off, or, are there ways we should be thinking beyond the pure economics?
Yeah, I think you'll see more partnership and more support down the line in the future. So less of throwing the ball over the wall, and a closer relationship with working with suppliers. I think even at government level, there is a very strong intent that anything that is used in this particular environment should be produced in Canada. Now, philosophically, that's a very nice thing, but economically, it's not the right thing for the industry to think about. We have to make sure we have a robust global supply and not have to make everything in Canada or the US or Europe or whatever it might be.
I'm very struck by that comment you made, because you, as you know, I spent 3 years working in Japan, and one of the models of their car industry that they taught the world, and particularly Toyota, was working closely with suppliers on joint projects. So they're almost an extension of the process. So it's like not quite being married, but certainly have familial relationships.
Yeah, and I think there are examples also even in our drug industry where we have one group that delivers drugs from all companies to the pharmacy at one shipment point, rather than 15 companies delivering 15 times a day. To do things that offer more efficiency to the system has got to help. And I think we'll see more of that in the new world, the developing new world.
So more cooperation, both internally and externally. More joint problem solving. I mean, actually, this sounds like it's good for innovation.
It is, and it's actually reflects on the agility model, because rather than go and tell the customer what you want, it's better to ask the customer what they want and get them involved from the very early stage in the sprints and the scrums. And the new world will bring that. I think it will move things.
I'm reminded of how Magna got its start with Frank Stronach,
yes,
who was researching their clients' customers. They were researching the car industry's customers so they could go with them for better ideas. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to go to a couple of questions. Oh, a big one for you, but you're a globalist. What's your view on the global economy in terms of the impact of COVID-19, particularly from a North American and Canadian perspective? Well, now, I think I'm on the edge of that one, that the way you've been talking about working within Roche, there's more connection, more cooperation going on between the groups.
Yeah, I think the economy will definitely change. I think we've seen this, with the price of oil. Yeah. I would expect that in industries, regardless of the industry, the survival of the fittest will be underlined more greatly than it would have been previously. You know, any of us that work in the healthcare industry are very fortunate that these are big companies with deep pockets, and they will survive this. And often they actually increase their shareholding because in a negative environment, it's a strong demand for drugs. I think the sad thing are the cash run businesses, the food stalls in New York, the restaurants, hotels. One of my daughters actually works in the hotel business in London. She's on furlough, fortunately, but she's back in Canada. Goodness knows what's going to happen to hotels, cruises. Although I expect there'll be a bounce back, and there's probably a limit of time when that bounce back will be positive versus that bounce back being negative. But probably like everyone else, there'll be a jump to restaurants. People will want to dine out, will want to socialize. It may be a different socializing and dining out experience, but I think everyone will want out the house to do something different, and hopefully that will be provided for us at some stage. And
we won't need to go to Georgia to do it.
Yes, well, exactly.
Ronnie, we're coming to the end of the session. As a sum up thought, what themes would you like people to take away in terms of leadership learning? I think agile is clearly one that you've talked a lot about.
I think for sure. I think also we work so hard to get into leadership positions that the learning is to continue to learn. Don't think you know it all. Take the reverse point of view. You'll learn more from everyone if you keep that philosophy going, and see every day as a new learning opportunity. And I was always brought up to treat everyone the way I wanted to be treated myself. And I built that philosophy into my own personal leadership. I think that's the best piece of advice I ever got. So listen and treat people the way you want to be treated yourself as a leader. You'll be highly respected forever that way.
Thank you, Ronnie. Robert, let's kick it back to you.
Please feel free to join us at our next Fireside Chat on May 6th at 2 p.m. with John Doig, Scotiabank's Executive Vice President and Head of Branch Banking. He will discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the financial services sector and will share his leadership insights, including his earlier work securing the 20-year partnership with worth a reported $800 million with Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. This included renaming the home of the Toronto Raptors and the Toronto Maple Leafs from the Air Canada Centre to Scotiabank Arena. Thank you again for attending today's Fireside Chat, and a special thank you to Ronnie Miller and Alan Middleton.
And a big thank you from me to Ronnie, who took time out of his busy day and international and domestic meetings to do this. Big fan, Ronnie. Thank you so much.
Very welcome.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.